If you want to see how I made this magnetic wall propagation station, keep watching. With the exception of the hardware and tools, these were my main supplies. I have magnets, 6 glass test tubes, a board, and 3 square dowels. I began by cutting all the pieces to size. The overall length of the item was based on the 36-inch dowels. I slightly trimmed the ends of each so that they're the same length, and my little hack for whenever I want multiple pieces to be the same size is I just tape them together with some painter's tape. After getting everything cut, I position all the pieces together to make sure they'll properly fit. And now it's time to use my favorite little tool. This is the Craig pocket hole jig. I got this from either Menards or Lowe's, but regardless, lots of stores carry these and they definitely do come in handy. I drilled pocket holes on the end of each of the small pieces and also on the back of the board, which you'll see in a little bit. Before screwing the frame together, I roughed up the surfaces that'll be touching with sandpaper and put a little dab of wood glue. I then used these corner clamps to hold everything in place, but after putting on the corner clamps, I saw a little gap, so I ended up adding a third clamp just to make sure everything was being held together tightly. I typically gravitate towards putting the screws in with a ratcheting screwdriver, just so I have a little bit more control. On the board, I measured out some guidelines and then marked where I want each hole to go. For drilling, I'm using a Forstner drill bit to make a nice flat bottom hole, along with a drill stop collar to control the depth. Now onto the magnets. After separating them, I used tape to differentiate between what's going in the board and what's going on the test tubes. And don't be fooled by the size of these magnets. These things are powerful, so they needed some strong holding glue. I went with epoxy. Smells terrible, but works well. And into each hole a magnet went. Now onto the test tubes. I used an L-square ruler to mark 1 inch down from the opening and then glued a magnet in place. Since painter's tape is not meant to hold things down, I covered it with a piece of clear packing tape for a stronger hold. Day 2, I went to my favorite store for spray paint. That's right, it's Menards. I really wanted ivory, but that tends to look a little yellow, so I went with this blossom white. Satin finish, of course. I also grabbed some of these. You'll see why. Before applying 2 to 3 coats of paint, I went over the frame with a sheet sander and did some light sanding between each coat by hand. To put this on the wall, I'm using keyhole hangers, and I always like to have a hole under these so there's a little depth for my mounting screws. I'm not too concerned about this looking pretty because it'll be covered up anyways. I pre-drilled my holes, went through and quickly screwed these in, and then went back to give all 4 a final tightening. Right now I like the unfinished look in my apartment, but I still want to protect the surface, so I'm using clear contact paper. That way if I decide in the future I want to paint this, I can easily peel it off and do just that. Day 3. The frame is dry and looking beautiful, so let's move on to final assembly. Remember these? These are going to be my spacers so the board can be evenly inset in the frame. I stacked a couple on the back to clamp it to the countertop and added an additional clamp to press the sides up against the board. Here you see me again using my ratcheting screwdriver to drive the screws in, which I repeated for all 6 pocket holes. Alright, here's how that inset edge turned out. And now we're at the final step, which is peeling off the tape and placing all the test tubes in place. And I just want to add, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you're the real MVP. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments.